Question number 9, Dr. David Clark.
My question is to the Minister of Economic Development and asks, does he agree with Moody's analytics that New Zealand has a two-speed economy as strong domestic demand cushions a weaker export sector?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, no, I don't agree that New Zealand has a two-speed economy. Latest growth figures out this morning confirm that economic growth is broad-based across a range of sectors. However, as I said earlier this afternoon, I do agree with the comments from Moody's when they confirmed New Zealand's top AAA rating in the past 2 weeks. And I quote, "New Zealand's economy is growing strongly. Moody's expects New Zealand's real GDP to remain robust through 2016, and compared to similarly rated countries, New Zealand has a track record of faster and more stable growth in recent years."
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Noting the effects of a two-speed economy, does he agree with Radio Live's Duncan Garner that 150 real forestry jobs lost in Northland with the collapse of Harvest Pro is big news, or is this just more good news for the booming Northland economy under National?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, what we do know about the Northland regional economy is that there was an increase of 7,500 jobs last year, of which 6,600 were full-time jobs. But the member raises a question regarding to forestry, and actually it is important to look at the forestry sector as a whole. Earlier this week I happened to be visiting 2 companies, a forestry mill just outside of the Bay of Islands and a forestry contracting, rural contracting service just outside of Kaitaia. And both of those were growing and hiring people as the forestry sector in Northland continues to expand.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Does he agree with Jacob Kajavala of Tuhoi and Ngāti Kahungunu, who says Harvest Pro is a very large firm, but there are a number of smaller contracting firms that hire up to 12 people that are sailing very close to the wind, and this is a very large example of failure? Does he agree?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Well, Mr Speaker, of course in every industry there is a range of firms, and some of them are successful, some of them are moderately successful, and some of them struggle. I think the member needs to understand that actually just taking one firm's situation and making it apply to the whole forestry sector is a little simplistic. The actual situation with the forestry sector is it has had a very strong run. There is some consolidation occurring at the moment, but we are seeing continued investment and continued job growth in the sector.
Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
Well, given that answer, and given that the facts say that exports of manufactured wood products have fallen by 3% under his government, while exports of raw logs have tripled, is he surprised that the wood industry is increasingly vulnerable to downturns in demand for logs, and that the industry has lost nearly 4,000 jobs net since 2008 as a result?
Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I'd have to check the veracity of the member's statements, but the reality of the New Zealand forestry sector is it has had significant growth. There is significant investment going on in the sector around New Zealand. I appreciate the member likes to talk different sectors of the economy down. Perhaps he should declare a forestry crisis, because that worked for manufacturing, it worked for exports, and it worked for housing.
Point of order. Point of order, Dr. David Clark.
Point of order. At what point, Mr Speaker, do the ad hominem attacks replacing an actual argument constitute an irrelevant answer? Because that was exactly what we keep hearing from the Minister.
Can I just invite the member, when he returns to his office, to have a very careful look at his question, which was a lengthy question. It talked about various parts of the forestry industry declining, some sailing, companies sailing close to the wind. That gave the Minister a lot of latitude in his answer. The Minister took the latitude that was given. Supplementary question, Dr. David Clark.
If the Minister doesn't agree with Moody's market commentators, doesn't agree with Duncan Garner and the media, doesn't agree with industry representatives, and disputes the relevance of Statistics New Zealand data and the veracity thereof, Does the minister still believe he is the only person driving in the right direction on the motorway?
Before I call the minister, that's exactly the type of question that's asked that gives a lot of latitude to a minister. Honourable Stephen Joyce.
Mr Speaker, I'm not sure that even Duncan Garner would speak of himself in the same breath as Moody's, but perhaps he would. I don't know, Mr Speaker. And I'm also not quite sure what the member means about leaping from sort of forestry to motorways, Mr Speaker. But can I tell the member this? The New Zealand economy is growing strongly. I know the member doesn't like it. 3.5% growth in the last year, better than most of the countries in the OECD. That's not to say everything is always perfect, but I think most people in the developed world would like the New Zealand economic numbers rather than the numbers in their own country, Mr Speaker, and actually the member should stop trying to talk the New Zealand economy down when actually New Zealand businesses are performing very well.
Point of order, Dr David.
I seek leave to table data showing 4,000 jobs have gone out of the forestry sector since 2008.
All I need is the source of the
from Statistics New Zealand.
That's available to all members.
Well,
question number 10, Todd Barclay.
My question is